You're listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
We talk a lot about the monuments that are coming down around the country. What we never think to talk about is what does it take to sculpt and build and erect a monument. Our guest today is Gary Casteel. He is a world-renowned sculptor. He is the sculptor of 3 of the monuments there at the Gettysburg National Battlefield. He's also sculpted a number of monuments around the country and even around the world. And so he's going to talk to us about what it's the process of sculpting, how you do it, and all that great stuff. He's also going to talk to us about what it's like to see those statues, those creations come down. A very personal perspective, seeing that he's the one sculpting the monuments. And so today is a great episode, and you'll want to stay tuned. Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about your studio there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? I mean, I know that's kind of a big, broad question to ask.
My studio in Gettysburg, I actually have 2 studios. I have one at home, which is my what I call my big, ugly, dirty studio. And then I have one downtown on Baltimore Street, 789 Baltimore Street, and that is open to the public. I have a gallery there and such, and we show our pieces as well as individuals can come into the studio and understand more about what a sculptor does. The interesting thing is pretty much everyone knows what a painter does, but what in the world does a sculptor do and how is it done? It's very informative, and we have a good time doing it.
So how long have you been sculpting?
I have been sculpting for a lifetime. I always wanted to be a sculptor, even as a child, and I just can't imagine doing anything else. I am 73 years old. I have done it my working life, and when I get up in the morning, my goal is to get into that studio and get back to it because I can't imagine doing anything else.
So what was it that as a kid that made you want to sculpt?
You know, that's an interesting question. I've been asked that question quite a bit, in fact. I have always been creating something. My interest has always been art, and my secondary interest is history. So I put those 2 together, and I call it the old nag. She's been after me for a lifetime. And I was always drawing, whittling, trying to make something. And I got into sculpting at a very early age, have worked in foundries, worked with other sculptors, did some stone cutting, worked with Italian marble carvers, and it just went on and on and on until I created that following early on. And from that point on, it was keep up. And keep creating. So that's it.
So then what is it as far as a vehicle-wise? What do you prefer to work with?
I much prefer the clay, which is later turned into a bronze. The reason being it's so difficult to get good stone to do the carving. You know, the good marble comes out of Italy. There's no 2 ways about it. The granites, that's done more with air and blasting and all that sort of thing. I like to have the tools in my hands. I like that connection. And so by sculpting in clay, I'll be the first to tell you it's much easier. There's no doubt about that. And you start out with a little piece of clay and it grows into a life-size whatever. And from that, you can go back and remove, you can add, you can do wonderful things. In stone, it's removal only until you get that work inside that stone. And it's very easy to make mistakes. And if you have a bad piece of stone, you have interior fissures, cracks. It creates a lot of uneasy days, shall we say.
When the clay gets bronzed, do you do the process of the work with the bronze as well, or do you send that off somewhere for somebody else to do that?
Right. Well, I used to do the whole thing. Over the years, I've gotten too busy, and pretty much what I do now is work with a client up front in the early stages, do the drawings, We get underway once I've been commissioned, and then I will sculpt the clay, but then I will walk it through the foundry. Now, meaning once that clay is done, I take it to the foundry. The molds are made there, the rubber molds. Those rubber molds are made in pieces, and from that, then the waxes are created, the wax castings. Those wax castings are produced. They are later involved in being dipped into liquid ceramic with dry powdered ceramic being put onto it until that piece of wax is totally encased. Once it's there, an encasement of a couple inches thick, then we let it dry for a few days to a week or better. And once it's dry, you melt out that wax. Now you have a ceramic encasement, but you have this void inside. You melt the bronze to a couple thousand degrees. You pour it into the ceramic shell, let it set for a day or two. You crack off the shell, clean up the casting, and that's one piece of a life size or whatever it may be. And it may be 6, 8, 10, 12 pieces. You have to weld all them together. When they're welded together, you go back, you grind it all down, clean it up, match all the sculptor's marks. Then you're ready for the patina or the final finish. You use a torch and acids, you brush it on, you heat it, and it turns with the color you want. You can make it red, white, and blue if you want. It depends on what type of acids and such you use. The final coat is nothing more than a coat of wax, and it's ready to be erected. And then, of course, that's when you get into the stone and the foundations, da-da-da-da-da. So you can have a sculpting time of 2 or 3 months on a life size, but the entire process, including the foundry, the foundation, all that sort of thing, you could put 1.5 years in a piece real quick, no doubt about it. So this is why you have multiple projects going on at one time.
So once this bronze statue is completed and it's put up in a park somewhere, or I'm talking an outdoor facility, obviously it would last a lot longer indoors, but it's put up somewhere in a park or, somewhere in an outside setting. How long, what is the life expectancy of that statue?
Forever.
Okay.
The bronze doesn't go away. Marble outside will wash away, no doubt about it. It's a soft stone. Granite does not. It stays there for quite a lengthy time, if not forever. But the bronze, it is copper and tin and zinc mixture. It is a metal. It's there forever. Now, it will tarnish. It will corrode. It will turn green because of the copper in it. And once every 20 years, depending on where the piece is located, is it near the ocean, is it under a bunch of trees or whatever, which causes corrosion faster, you have to go back and refinish it, which is not a big deal, but it does need to be refinished to keep that look of how it was the day you installed it. But no, the bronze doesn't go away. It's there forever.
So then does the monument, can it be refinished on its pedestal there where it's been installed, or does it need to be removed and sent off somewhere?
No, it can be done right there. Absolutely.
So then most of the monuments that we have had out around the country for however many years, do most of these cities and counties and states and the federal government and so forth, do most of these places do the refinishing every 20 years?
Yes and no. It depends on where it's located and who is in control of the monument. There are cities I've driven through that the entire monument is totally green, no doubt about it. And it's simply because they do not understand the process. They have no interest in cleaning it up, or they like it the way it is. There's a lot of answers to that question. But usually, cities do have a plan in place to maintain those things. and they'll contact individuals like myself or other restoration companies that will come in and take care of that. I used to do quite a bit of restoration and replacement of pieces for the National Park Service years ago, but I stopped doing that just simply because, again, I'm so busy in the studio.
So I know that your studio is in Gettysburg. So have you ever resculpted and replaced one of the monuments there at Gettysburg?
I have done replacement pieces, not the entire monument. There are people out there who will try to rip off a piece of a monument. They'll try to steal a piece of the bronze. They'll break off the ears on the horses, on the stone monuments, and they need to be replaced, and I have done that. But it's not just at Gettysburg, it's at all national parks or even city parks around the country. I don't want to say a common practice, but it does happen frequently.
So then you could say, I guess it'd be technically correct that you have sculpted at least some of the monuments at Gettysburg.
I have sculpted some of the monuments at Gettysburg. In fact, at Gettysburg, I have 3 entire monuments that I've erected there.
Okay.
The General James Longstreet Monument, which is on Confederate Avenue, that was erected in 1998. I did the Colt Memorial. That was commissioned by the Sons of Confederate Veterans. That was erected on Steinmore Avenue that honored the Colt brothers from Gettysburg. One fought for the North, one fought for the South. And then down in Gettysburg, there is a monument that I did a couple of years ago that honored the musicians of the Civil War, and it's a large drummer boy up on a pedestal.
I know you had said that you have always been interested in history.
Yes.
But what is it that specifically drew you to the war between the states and to the Gettysburg area? And because there's a lot of history, and yet you landed in a very specific place.
Right. Commissions.
Okay.
Let's talk business. Let's talk business. You know, no. Really, what it amounts to is I have a very, very keen interest in the French Indian War. Reason being, I find it to be very artistic, very colorful. There's a lot more involvement from other countries, other personalities, that sort of thing. The Civil War is us. It's our great-grandfathers, our uncles, our whatever, and it's our next-door neighbors. But the Civil War is very interesting in the fact that it was fought for a lot of different reasons, no doubt about it. Slavery is the issue that keeps beating us up, but folks, if you do the research, there's a lot more involved. I mean, even Abraham Lincoln said himself, who's going to pay the bills if the South secedes? That tells us it's economics. We don't want to talk about that, though. And so it's really interesting. The Civil War, I joke with people saying, we're going to make this simple. It boils down to, we're going to the prom, who's going to take the pretty girl home? The French Indian War, vastly different. There's a lot more competition on who's going to take the pretty girl home. So, and I'm not making a joke out of this, but it can be right simple if you look at it, or involved if you wish it to be. And why am I in Gettysburg? Because a lot of my clientele come to Gettysburg, and they follow the war between the states, and a lot of them commission me to do particular things, be it new pieces or restoration. And so it's a good place for business if you look at it that way.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, That's www.barnesreview.org. You can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. On your website, and we'll talk about your website and things a little bit later.
Sure.
But on your website, there is a place where basically you sculpt miniature replicas of each of the monuments at Gettysburg that people can purchase from your website.
That is correct. Actually, what we did about 20 years ago, I started doing those, and I produced them in a brown resin, simply because that was what was available at the time for a casting material. I got very, very busy with large commissions, and so I walked away from them. We had about 60 pieces on the market at that time, and we did not have a website because, again, the computer age had not come into full force like it is today. Well, about a year and a half ago, after 20 years, I had just been contacted multiple times by various individuals who have interest in particular units or history itself or collectors. And they were asking, when are you going to do it again, Gary? And so I decided to go back and start doing them in between life-size commissions that I am working on. And so I started doing Gettysburg again, only this time, instead of doing them in a brown resin like I did before, now they're cast in a resin with granite powder and bonded bronze so that we can match those materials as they are on the battlefield as closely as possible, meaning the color of the stone, the bronze, the verbiage that's on there, the whole 9 yards. And in fact, if you look at the replicas, the scale of the replica is determined by the verbiage that's on the monument itself. When I'm laying this out on the computer to get the plates made to start sculpting the piece, if the verbiage is too small and you can't read it, then you've got to make the replica larger. So that's what determines the scale. It's really fascinating. Most of the monuments that we're doing, 1 inch equals a foot or better. That's usually how it works out. But those replicas, we now have around 50 replicas on the market in the past year and a half. We opened the gallery, and again, with the public studio there, and they have taken off like a rocket. And I must say, it makes me very, very happy simply because the history is still alive. It's still needed. It's still wanted. That's what makes me so happy. With each replica that we produce, we do a 2-page history of the unit for the Battle of Gettysburg or other battlefields that we are now including. We also have Antietam, Chickamauga, and a couple of others included into the selection now. So we want people to understand what those monuments represent, the valor of the individuals and of the country, north and south. We're very pleased. We're shipping all over the country, Canada, Europe. It's a major draw, and so we're very pleased with that now.
Have you ever been to the Antietam Gallery in Antietam?
Yes, I have.
So I was there recently, and I want to say it was maybe June 9th. I can't remember the exact day now, but I was there very recently. Were your statues in there and I just did not notice them, or?
No, they are not there. The only place that you can get these replicas are from me, the Casteel Sculptures, LLC.
Okay.
That's the only place, simply because if we wholesale these pieces, the price will go up. And I'm trying to keep the number down so that more people can appreciate and get them. First of all, let me say this. These pieces are not inexpensive to produce. It's a lot of labor. Every piece is totally handmade, totally hand-built. We have to make the molds. We have to pay for those molds. Some pieces have 4 or 5 molds that have to be produced to put all these together. And so all of that needs to be paid for. And then those molds burn out after 25, 30 castings, whatever. So you need to remake the molds. Therefore, dollars need to be put in place to take care of all of that. And so then the time to produce it, you just don't push a button. There is no push button on this routine. It's all done by hand. So what you're buying is truly a piece of art.
So then when someone orders one of these replicas, it's not like you have a warehouse with 100 or 1,000 or whatever of each of these, and then somebody just fills the order, puts it in a box, and slaps a postage label on it.
Doesn't happen.
Okay.
What happens is we usually have a half a dozen pieces in stock. And because we're at the same time sculpting pieces, making molds on pieces, making new molds on pieces that are burnt out, we're packing, shipping. And so we usually have, like I say, about a half a dozen in stock. And if we are out of stock, we can get them back in stock within a week to a week and a half. And then ship out. So it's not a big deal. But again, it's not just thousands being pumped out by the push of a button.
You talk about commissions of new works. Gettysburg is just a stone's throw from Carroll County, Maryland.
Yeah, there you go.
And I understand that you've been commissioned to build a monument in Carroll County, Maryland that's probably bigger than any of the individual monuments in Gettysburg right now.
I would love to say yes to that, but the answer is no. A little background. I have 20 years ago, let's back up. 20 years ago, I learned that there was no national memorial to the war between the states. Now, I didn't know that, and it's certainly my shortcoming, but a lot of other people don't know that. Every war this country has been involved in has a war memorial in Washington, D.C. The war between the states does not. What I did is I worked with one of the past Gettysburg Park superintendents, John Latchar, who is now retired. John's a good guy. He did well for the park. But I talked to him and I said, John, can you check with your home office and verify that there is no national monument to the war between the states? He did. He came back and he said, no, that's something you should consider, Gary. I did. And since I knew that there was no national memorial out there and no movement to put one up, I went ahead and approached the top 30 historians of the country at that time. Now, since then, 5 of them have passed away. Now, I'm talking about historians from Jim McPherson, Ed Bars, the whole 9 yards. Men, women, they all knew their history. They wrote the books. They teach the children. They are the recognized leaders of war between the states or Civil War history. Okay, I designed the memorial, and I sent them a listing of what information I needed, because what I wanted to do was to produce an educational memorial, not just another rock on a hill that people drive by and say, what's that? I want the kids to come there in buses, hop out that bus, go in there with a guide, and when they walk away, they have a true and complete history of the war, north, south, black, white, the whole 9 yards. We did that. I got their listings back. We put it together. We have the top 16 civilian portraits of those civilians in bronze of those individuals who left behind items we study today as to how the war affected the civilian population. Then we have the top 16 military leader portraits in bronze of those who affected the outcome of the war. We go on, then we have the top 20 events that we consider events you need to know about to understand what the war was all about and what it took to win that war. With that, we have bronze life-size figures of infantry, artillery, naval, cavalry, Confederate Union, we have in the center of a large plaza 2 veterans in their reunion uniforms in bronze sitting on the park bench speaking to the children. That's the future. The whole project, though, is about 90 feet in diameter. It's circular, 4 entrances, encircled with all the flags of the United States in 1865. Because you got to remember, this only covers 1861 to 1865. We have been looking for the last 15 years a location to build this memorial. Some areas we have walked away from, or the area itself refused. The area that you're talking about in Carroll County was Taneytown. We were doing wonderful things there. We were getting very, very close. There was an election of mayor and town council. The mayor who was promoting it and part of the town council that was with us was not elected. And the new mayor came in and with his moves refused to accept the memorial, even though we have a nonprofit status organization, proposal all in place, the model's made, we have an economic impact study that will blow you away that was done by the University of Michigan, and we have 1/3 of the project already sculpted, done. They refused because the mayor said, we have too much traffic with it coming into town. We don't want the traffic. My statement's very simple. If you're economically depressed, no traffic, no money, period. So we're looking.
I've been to Taneytown, Maryland, and you're right. There's not a lot of traffic that goes through there. It's a lot of area, and it's close to a lot of places where people come in.
It's close to the Mason-Dixon line. That's what we wanted. Absolutely. So we are talking to 2 other locations right now, and one is in Maryland, one is in Virginia, and I can't say what they are just simply because we're in discussions.
So you say you have 1/3 of the monument sculpted. I assume that means that you're warehousing it somewhere. Are you warehousing it at your own personal expense?
Correct. Yes. My goal is to put this memorial up, period, because it needs to happen. If we don't do this, folks, by the time my generation and the next generation is gone, it will be so totally out of whack, forgotten, misused, however you wish to put it. It'll be disgusting. The war between the states, the Civil War, whichever you wish to call it, made us what we are today. Why should we be ashamed of who we are? We became the greatest nation in the world, and we had a war within our own country. But here we are, still the great nation we are. We should not be ashamed of who we are. We should be looking forward to make ourselves even better.
Well, you kind of answered the question there, but I'll go ahead and ask it, and you can be a little more specific in the answer. You know, World War I think, defined the country to some degree. I think World War II, although the definition that it gave us, now World War I definitely defined Europe, but whatever definition World War I had given the United States, I've kind of read about in the history books, but didn't really feel the effects of it in my life now. Mm-hmm. I can see where our country changed in World War II, and I can see how, in some degrees, my life is even a little different than maybe I can envision it would have been had that war not been fought. But really and truly, has there been any war that this country has been involved in that has influenced or determined the course of our culture and civilization more than the war between the states?
It's the only war we've had since we've become a country. Now, meaning a legitimate government country. The French Indian War, that was when we were England. The war with Britain, the Red War, that's when we were with England. It's our only war. And so what came out of it, for what good, bad, or ugly it is, made us what we are today. And that's the only thing you can say or look at it.
When you say it's our only war, you mean that's the only war that we actually fought on our own soil?
Well, there was other wars on the soil, but we weren't us yet, meaning the United States. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
French-Indian War, we weren't here. The Red War, we weren't here. We were a bunch of colonists, and we wanted to secede from England, just like the South wanted to secede from the North, the United States. So it is the one war that we were involved in, meaning the United States within ourselves.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Sculptor, was someone who creates monuments. Well,
Yeah.
before I ask this question, let me ask you this. Have you done monuments to any of the other wars or just monuments to individuals and so forth through the years as well?
I've done mostly individual monuments and monuments to the war between the states, simply because it just happens to be my following. There was a major move back in the 80s and 90s for Civil War art, and I certainly fell into that category, and it just pushed, and every monument I was cranking out was Civil War related, except for only a few. So I'm known for my Civil War art, more so than a piece I may have done, for a small town out there somewhere. Yeah, I'm mainly known as a historical, quote, Civil War artist, period.
So the monuments that are all over the country, obviously you didn't create them all, but you created some of them. So as someone who's a creator, someone who puts forth the effort to create a monument, and
Yeah.
of course, then that a monument is erected. But now
Right.
fast forward to 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and there are certain people who they're racing to see how fast they can tear those monuments down. As someone who actually
Right.
created the monument, what is it like to you to see it taken down?
Well, first of all, I look at these people as being very foolish, and certainly not being respectful, and not knowing their history. They'll fall into one of those categories pretty quickly. I have told people for decades, and mostly since this monument removal thing started, I don't care if I walk out in my backyard and plant a rose bush. Someone is going to complain about the odor. Why does it give them the right to remove that rose bush? It's called respect, people. If you don't like something, you don't have to take it down. You can turn around and walk away. You can turn your head. You can stand there and cuss that thing if you want. But why are you depriving your neighbor of his right to appreciate it? That's my whole point. We're losing that respect factor.
But is there a personal pain there that you feel, let me ask you this: have any of your monuments been torn down yet?
Not taken down, but I've had a couple defaced.
Okay.
And of course there's some pain because you've spent all that time and effort, and you feel for the people you work with. My clients, I always call my clients my family because I work very, very closely with them, and I feel for them when this happens. And we just had one defaced down at South Mountain Battlefield that was put up several years ago to the North Carolinians. And it's disgusting. We had to go in and clean it and put it all back in shape, and it's there today. But again, there's no reason to do this. If you don't like something, you can certainly make your statement. You can put a newspaper article out there. You can get on radio, TV, whatever. But why do you wish to deprive your neighbors? I don't get it. I don't know. I guess I was raised differently.
Well, I don't want to ask you specifically what substance should be used because I don't want to give people an education.
Yeah.
Because they might actually
Yeah,
they might actually use that education, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for having put that out there. But
there you go.
But you see a lot of people, they deface monuments with paint and different things.
Yeah.
And, you know, it takes a little bit of work, but ultimately the statue can be, if anything, sometimes I say these people who are going around defacing some of these monuments are doing us a favor because then the Park Service comes in and cleans it up and it's like new again.
That's a good point.
So they're forcing the maintenance of the statue that might otherwise not have taken place. But
there you go.
Is there a substance out there that these people just haven't thought of yet that would actually destroy these monuments? And don't tell us what it is, but are there?
No, there's.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's materials out there that you can use to clean the monuments with, get the paint off, all the whole 9 yards. Oh, absolutely, yes.
But is there something that these folks who would seek to destroy a monument, is there something they could be using other than paint that could be doing a lot more damage or even destruction than what we're seeing?
Well, I'd rather not get into that.
Like I said, don't tell us what it is. We don't want to give them that education for sure. But
yeah, right, exactly.
But it is possible that if one of these people got a little more smart, if you will, or a little more creative, that we could start seeing more damage even than we're seeing.
Very possible, yes.
Okay. So the National Monument, quite an undertaking.
It is.
It seems like it's a lot of optimism to think that a project like that can go forward, given the political culture that we have today, where everything is coming down rather than in other words, you're wanting to raise the. You talk about Moab, the mother of all bombs. I guess this is Moam, the mother of all monuments.
Yeah, there you go.
You're wanting to raise Moam in the midst of everything being taken down. That requires a lot of optimism on your part.
Well, it does. See, the one thing that you have to understand, old Gare, as I call myself, I love a challenge. And the one thing that you never want to say to me is you can't do it. There's a way, and we keep working on it. Will it happen? I absolutely believe that it will. There are people out there who are willing to donate, to do whatever's necessary to put this up. All I need is location, period.
So is there no dirt available in the Capitol, or is it that the government agencies just aren't going to give up the dirt for it, or?
They refused. They refused. They won't talk about it.
So I'm assuming you talked to them during the Obama years. Have you talked to them again during the Trump years and got the same response?
I talked to them before Obama. Refused. If I go back to them now, I can't imagine what could happen. My thought is there's not a politician out there who wants to get his skirts dirty. He wants to keep his job. It needs to be private simply because it was a private war, shall we say. Once the federal government would get involved, and I'm being totally honest here, they're going to look at the story that's being told. And even though it's by the very people who write the books, teach the children, the whole 9 yards, government will want to change that story because the government has a story of their own that they are pursuing. If you go to the national parks, the Battlefield National Parks, there is a consistency of story they wish to tell. They will have an issue with some of the history that we are telling because we're gone far beyond what they are. And this is why the government would never allocate property. If you go to Washington, D.C., I have worked in D.C., I know exactly what it takes to put something in D.C. You go to the national memorials, none of them in any way, shape, or form tells the story. They only put up a rock, put names on it, do whatever's necessary to make the folk happy. None of them tell a story. I was to the World War II Memorial a couple of years ago after they put it up, and I was talking to a couple of the vets there. And I told them, I said, fellas, I'm really proud that you got your memorial. You earned it. You really did deserve this. Before that came out of my mouth, one old vet turned around to me and he said, we're happy we got it, but it doesn't say a damn thing about what it took to get it. Bingo. It never will. It never will. Any memorial, war memorial in Washington, D.C., look at them. They will not ever tell the story. So what good educationally is it to the next generation? Nothing.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org. So you talk about changing the narrative. You know, I've gone to Gettysburg several times throughout the years. And I've noticed the narrative shifts, changing at Gettysburg. And so you're saying it's just as obvious everywhere else.
Correct.
I assume you still have a relationship with the folks there in Gettysburg, and I don't want you to say anything that would jeopardize that relationship.
Oh, no. I have a good relationship with the Park Service. No big deal. Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. The rank and file people who work in the Park Service.
Yes.
Do you think that they're, of course, you know, as time goes on, older people retire, younger people take their place. Do you think that the staffing of the Park Service is, in other words, is the story kind of, I won't say it's evolving, is it devolving because it's changing as the staffing of themselves of the Park Service? Or do you think that you have a narrative that even the people who work in the Park Service, when they have to hear the Morgan Freeman voiceover when they walk by the door, or however many times a day, they just shake their head and say no.
Yeah. Well, you know, that could be a tough question. Of course, the younger people coming into the Park Service have a vastly different background than the older ones, no doubt about that. And they're also going to be coming into a system that has evolved over the years to the, I'll just say it, the PC thinking of the day. And so they'll have to conform simply because that's their job. The older workers were raised at a time when thought was vastly different. And, of course, they want to keep their jobs, too, until they retire. So they're going to do as the boss says, shall we say. All of the battlefield national parks are evolving in a different way than what it was originally. It's like at Gettysburg, there at the old visitor center, there was just case after case after case of materials to see, to view, the weapons, the whatever, uniforms, whatever it may be. When they built the new visitor center, and I understand they went into a public, a private relationship with the group there, And a lot of that now has been put downstairs in the vaults. And so you get a smaller viewing, shall we say, of what was originally there at the park. And I've had a lot of people complain about that to me, about where's all of the displays, where they all go, what they do with all of them. Well, if you want to see them, you have to contact the park, and it takes you a while to get in to see them. So it's, they're very protected, they're under control, all that sort of thing. But again, the times have changed, and it's going to continue to do that in the future. I think that's the best way to answer it.
Well, we were in Gettysburg, I want to say maybe a year ago, January. My son wanted me to get him a belt buckle. I have one, and I ended up having to give it to him because I couldn't get him one up there. But he wanted me to get him a belt buckle, like a belt buckle that I got, I don't know how many years ago, there, in the gift shop at the park. Mm-hmm. And it was a Confederate belt buckle. It wasn't like a, big Confederate flag belt buckle. It was just the one that said CS on it.
Yeah.
And we go into the gift shop, and they had U.S. belt buckles, but no CS belt buckles. And and there wasn't a Confederate flag to be found in that entire bookstore.
No, it's totally disgusting.
Yeah, it used to not be that way. I mean, it used to be that, you could buy Northern stuff there, you could buy Southern stuff there, you could whatever.
Correct.
And it's definitely not that way anymore. Of course, Stone Mountain, Georgia, Stone Mountain, Georgia is in the South. You can't even buy a Confederate flag at the Stone Mountain gift shop, and Dolly Parton owns that gift shop.
I know that. So, it's the PC thinking. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so, once again, you are depriving your neighbor. That's what it is. The national park here, the visitor center is a private consideration. And
so it's not owned by the Park Service.
Decided, I'm sorry?
So it's not owned by the Park Service.
No, that's private. So it's that PC thinking. They don't want to upset a few people. Well, again, the problem is what about the people who would like to own a Confederate belt buckle, who happens to be from Georgia? Now, if you go downtown Gettysburg, you don't see that happening. All the flags are flying, all the belt buckles you want with CS on, because they understand one thing. And I'm tied very closely to the business owners downtown. They will not take down the Confederate flag. They will not remove Confederate items from their stores because of one thing: economics. They understand people coming from the South will buy that. Well, why would I want to take it out of my store? It's called intelligence.
So when I was in Gettysburg, I went and met with a couple of directors there of the Park Service, just to kind of advocate for, the maintenance of Confederate monuments and so forth. And I asked them, point blank, I said, does the Park Service ever have any plans of maybe, not maintaining, these monuments and these memorials here and maintaining the park in its present form?
Sure.
And he looked at me, he said, absolutely not. He said, it'll be like this 1,000 years from now. Was that the truth? Is he known it at this time, or was he just saying that to me because that was the nice answer that would make me leave his office happy?
Well, let me put it this way. It depends on who you were talking to. He may have been one of the temporary superintendents who's only here for 3 or 4 months and then they move on because we're going up the corporate ladder within the National Park Service. We have not had a permanent superintendent here for quite some time. They're hoping to get one shortly, but every few months they would bring a new park superintendent in. The problem is some of these park superintendents coming in have never been involved with battlefield parks. They never knew there was a battle at Gettysburg. I mean, my question is what are they doing here? Well, anyway, the battlefields monumentation around the country. Well, let's back up. First of all, we have to understand one thing, and it was on the radio yesterday, and I've been involved with a meeting or two on this. The Park Service has gone broke. They are, $16 billion or something or other in debt. They're going down. They need to make money. How do they make money? Well, it used to be supported through taxation. Well, apparently, because of political moves, the PC crap, all that kind of thing, the money's not there. So what they're doing now is they have a plan to tax or charge fees to commercial bus companies. In other words, if a bus comes to the Gettysburg National Park, they pay a yearly $300 to bring that bus onto the Gettysburg National Park. And then they also pay $5 a head of the people who are in the bus. All of that money goes to the National Park Service to try to cover their arrears and bring the profits back up again because they're so far down on their level. Okay, if that bus goes to Antietam, another national battlefield park, they have to pay another $300 license fee, plus another $5 a head ticket. So the bus companies are in an uproar. They bring God knows how many hundreds of thousands of visitors a year to the battlefield parks, and now they're getting hit with these fees. What does that tell us? Some of these bus companies are going to start backing off. So the dollars go down locally, not only within the National Park Service visitor centers, but in the town itself. So it's harming everyone. They're trying to negotiate all this now to work it out and bring those fees down.
Well, that explains then why, because I was in Boston recently. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I was in Boston. A lot of the places that we went to, of course, are maintained by different. But I noticed that some of the places were maintained by the National Park Service, and yet there were big boxes there soliciting donations. Not just the boxes there, but even as people went in who didn't donate, it was like there was somebody there to suggest that you go back and drop a few dollars.
Correct.
So now I know why they were pushing for contributions so heavily.
Yep, you got it. That's the name of the game. And it's like the monuments on the battlefield. We talked about that earlier. The maintenance of those monuments. Gettysburg National Park has laid off a large number of their employees, and from what I've been told. And I assume that is true. And so with their numbers, the employee numbers coming down, the grass is growing, the fences are falling down, the trees are coming up in the fence rows, and the monuments need repairs or maintenance, and it's being done on a lesser scale. Now, there used to be, and I feel that there probably still is, a monument adoption program. Where groups or individuals would adopt a monument and they would raise funds for a monument endowment fund for maintenance of that particular monument. I know when we did the General James Longstreet Monument back in 1998, it's the only equestrian that's located on the ground, full life-size bronze horse and rider. Okay. There was a maintenance fee given to the park at that time from the people who commissioned me to do that piece. And that maintenance fund was to be kept in perpetuity for the maintenance of General James Longstreet Monument. So there's some out there, but there's other monuments that there's no maintenance fees, whatever, except for what the government provides. Well, if the government is losing money, if the Park Service is going down, what's going to happen to those monuments?
Well, is it just my observation, or like, for example, New York has a behemoth of a monument, and yet most of the southern monuments, even the Lee Monument for Virginia, isn't as big as that New York monument. So is it just my perception, or did the Northerners build a lot bigger monuments than the Southerners did?
First of all, Confederate monuments weren't allowed on the park in the beginning. You know that.
Right.
It took a few years before the South was allowed to even think about putting a monument on the park, and then also the South was, shall we say, strapped financially because of the war and all that sort of thing. So it took them decades to put any monuments up at all. Now the Virginia Monument, where Robert E. Lee stands on top of, That's the Virginia State Monument. That was put up, I believe, in 1917 or somewhere along that line. The North Carolina Monument that was sculpted by the gentleman who sculpted the Mount Rushmore Monument, that was put up, and I'm guessing, I think it was in the 30s or something or other when he put that one up. The later Confederate monuments on Confederate Avenue were put up much, much later, in the 70s, even as late as the 80s and 90s. So it took them years to come back and be able to put the monies from the states into those monuments. And that's why at Gettysburg there's so many more Union monuments than what there is Confederate monuments. The Confederate monuments basically are on Confederate Avenue, and that's it. So there's not much else there.
Well, the Longstreet Monument that you had sculpted, I can remember for years that it was buried in the bushes and you couldn't even see it.
Yeah, well, it's nice and clean now.
Yes, sir. I noticed that the last time that I was there. But
there you go.
Yeah, and in fact, I can remember the first time I was at Gettysburg finding it quite on accident.
Yeah, right.
I won't tell you why I was looking for bushes to go into, but I discovered it quite on accident.
Yeah.
And, so I'm sure you were glad to see the monument, clear and open up now. But why was it even allowed to get all overgrown like it was?
Well, again, that's park maintenance. And now, let me say this: the folks who commissioned me to do that was the Sons of Confederate Veterans out of Sanford, North Carolina, and those boys come up every year, and they put new mulch down. They pick up any trash, they rake everything down, they keep it nice and clean, but they come up 1 to 2 times a year to maintain that monument. And so they do a nice job, but they can't cut trees, they can't cut bushes, they can't, do this, do that. All they can do is just basically rake the yard and mow the grass, basically. And so, again, it's park maintenance. And so there was some pressure on the park to remove some shrubbery, shall we say.
But is there anything in particular that you would have hoped I would have asked you about that I failed to ask you about, or something you were hoping to put out there for our listeners?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll bring up one point. The question that I am asked on a frequent basis, when people come to me and they want to put up a monument on a particular battlefield around the country. The National Park Service years ago, in fact it was right after Longstreet, started a moratorium on monumentation. In other words, no new monuments. Does that mean you cannot get a monument on a battlefield? No, you can. There's just a lot more steps you have to go through to get it. And basically what it amounts to is you have to prove, one, is there a monument already on the battlefield honoring that organization or unit or whatever? If not, that's good. You have to have support from your state, the governor, the congressional people, the whole 9 yards. You have to show that there is a need to put that monument up. And if you do, you must have a maintenance fund on that monument. It used to be that you could ask to get a monument and they would agree and you could put it up. Now it takes time to get to that point to even consider doing a fundraiser, getting a design going, the whole 9 yards. So it's more difficult on battlefields nowadays.
But people are still getting monuments erected, though.
They are. I've got right now 3 monuments in consideration at different battlefields.
What is your website? Tell us your website so that people know how to get hold of you or how to... CasteelSculptures.LLC.com. Now that's CASTEEL Sculptures, SCULPTURES LLC.com. Well, I'd like to thank you for visiting with us today, and
thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And with that, I'm going to end today's broadcast. We are out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. It was very interesting to talk to Gary to get the perspective of the sculptor himself on all of the monuments that are being taken down around the country. And so one last time, I want to thank him for being our guest. Also want to encourage you to look up Gary Casteel sculptures on the internet and to come to my website, www.dixieheritage.net. Great materials on both websites. At any rate, until next week, from all of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, thank you and God bless. See you next week.